Here today by Darius. Say hi, Darius.
Hello,
How you doing
everyone.
today?
I'm good. Yourself?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for jumping on here with me so we can talk about this interesting use case that you have been working on. So, agenda for today is going to be to take a peek at what's new with Ziti, and then we're going to dive into multi-region APIs. So that is going to be a service config heavy conversation, I'm guessing, but we'll find out in just a few minutes. So first of all, what is new with Ziti? We've had 3 release bumps since last week, and of those, this one is interesting. 26.6. The other 2 were just version bumps to get a new CI out or new library versions and things like that, dependency updates. So taking a look at the summary here, you might want to get this version right away if you've been seeing slower blocked links. And there's a little bit of more description here about what that means. Basically, flow control, letting end-to-end flow control take over if one of the fabric links is blocked. So that sounds like a really important update for our adaptive mesh. And then also in the fabric, there's a new field added to circuit events. So taking a peek at what that looks like down here, you've got this Terminator remote address that looks like a new field right there. So if you're programming against the Fabric API, got some new information to work with there. Other than that, a bunch of issues have been fixed. So if you look at the changelog, if you go to the open Ziti repo under releases, you can see the changelog there and take a look at what specifically has been fixed. All right, so Darius, thanks again for jumping in here. And so what is the problem that you were trying to address when you stumbled onto this set of solutions? It has something to do with multi-region APIs?
Yeah, it just has something to do with the ability to kind of reach a region that you want to maybe update something. You have a bunch of API regions that you deploy, like Kubernetes is deployed, and you have control planes and all these other regions. And the standard service basically is good for most of the applications. The standard Ziti service, where it's kind of like a load balancer that you can kind of you don't really care which region you go to, as long as you get the best performance and the base latency, for example, or maybe you bias to a certain a region that you want to go to all the time. Then you can bias the algorithm of the fabric that you can actually go there. But there's some situations where you actually want to access the control plane, where you want to maybe delete resources, or maybe update resources, or maybe delete the entire cluster and stuff like that. So then you want to specifically go to, so you want like a predictable destination, so to speak. You want to say, okay, I want to go there, right? Not the algorithm will determine based on the underlying factors
So
on
this
the
is
fabric.
different from load balancing. You don't want
Yes.
the control plane to decide for you where to send the traffic. What you're saying is that you're on the client side on the consumer side of an API producer consumer relationship where you have a server and a client. On the client side, the consumer side, you know where you're going. You know which domain name you want to go to. And so you're talking about solving the problem of how do I configure Ziti to do the right thing with that traffic if I have a client configuration that's multi-region.
Yes. So yeah, basically you want to tell them exactly what you want to do, not what the fabric is kind of configured to do.
Okay, so your API client has a domain name that it's trying to access, right?
Right. So in this situation is let me just like post a little picture here that I've been working on. Let me just post this here. So I'm like in a GitHub when I created my. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is basically kind of like a sample simple, a service architecture where you have a client, could be a person, a user, could be a DevOps engineer, or network engineer, or maybe even some kind of orchestration system that kind of deploys these, let's say in this case, Kubernetes clusters and stuff like that. So it basically, there's the central point that's kind of like you want to basically say, okay, I want to get to this, and obviously every one of them, these clusters have basically control plane, some kind of an API server that you can hit, and then you can tell it to what you want it to do. And basically, from that point of view, you would basically tell the fabric that I actually want to go to this, right? You just tell them, and every time let's say I want to go there all the time today, so I don't want to go anywhere else. I don't want to be load distributed to another cluster. I just want to go there all the time. So you basically tell the fabric that I want to go there, and basically and using the DNS names, because obviously that's already built in. So there's nothing really that you have to, as a user, have to change the way you do your daily tasks. You just deploy through the API, basically. So so we wanted to have something that the users would not change the way they do things today,
Okay.
and basically, they they use, let's say deploy, in this instance they deploy AKS clusters, right? So you have some kind of a cloud API where you deployed it, and then you want to access the APIs of the cluster itself, and then they whether they can be public APIs or they can be private
Right.
APIs, and then private APIs, obviously you have to have some kind of a VPN tunnel to get to it, because it's only
Okay.
reachable locally. So that's where Ziti comes in, and Ziti comes in with this option where you can actually address that situation.
Okay, so in this situation, the application on the client side is doing its own load balancing. It's deciding where to send the request, uh, which of these clusters, which of these Azure clusters to send the request to.
Mhm.
And so the problem that you ran into is that you weren't able to describe that architecture with a service config.
Yeah, so I knew that. I know there's an addressable terminators in our option, but I was, and recently we added this new feature where you can actually address that terminator with a DNS name. So basically, and can be, and that DNS name can be intercepted basically on the ingress side, and then advertise as a link, as we can go through the configuration. It's
Right.
advertised on the other side of the service endpoint, that kind of advertises itself. Okay, this is the DNS number one. I'm the endpoint that you can reach me on this DNS name, and that's kind of advertised on these so-called terminators, which is every service when you deploy a service, and you
But you
assign this.
said that you didn't want to force any changes to how the client was operating, but in order to use addressable terminators, normally you would have to have modified the code to implement the OpenZD Edge, isn't that right? So that it could use addressable terminators?
I mean, obviously, you have to configure this on a Ziti server side, but as a users, you run the same command. Let's say in this case, we can go through it. You basically, once you deploy the cluster, let's say you use, in this instance, to show I'm using kubectl, which is, that's most, a lot of DevOps, or cloud engineers be using that to kind of configure the cluster once it's
Yep.
deployed. And so, and obviously there's a kube config, and that's automatically gets configured with the API, API DNS name. And then, the guy, the network engineer, or the engineer that's doing this doesn't have to think about, okay, well, do I have to configure something? Do I have to do something on my side to kind of work with this? And they don't have to. They just, obviously, that there's some configuration on the Ziti side to kind of match that configuration. But once that's done, then you go back to your kubectl and you run the same commands, and you're basically being routed over the ZD network and the specific location that you're trying to reach. Once you can select the context, obviously on your kubectl, and then once you select the context, the specific context is selected, and then it routes you based on that DNS name to the proper location that you wanted to reach.
Okay, so this means that with this particular service config that you've discovered, you can have a single ZD service that describes all of these different destinations, and they're automatically matched up based on the domain name that's being requested.
Yes.
And that's much better than having separate ZD services for each thing which have no relationship to each
Yeah.
other.
Yes. Yeah, so
So you
it's basically just to, sorry to cut you off a bit, but it's basically the thing is that you would, if there was no addressable terminators with a service, the standard service, you would have to actually configure one service per destination, right?
per destination, right?
Yes, because you want predictable destination every time you want to go somewhere, so you have to limit to that one destination, right? Because then you're always going to go to that destination, because that's the only destination that you have within that service.
Okay.
And that's not practical. Scalability comes into issue because you have so many services, depending how many how many
Right.
regions you have, and maybe you go multi-cloud, and it can go up in count. So yeah, and
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I see why you were looking for a solution to this problem, to avoid that infinite proliferation of services for many, many destinations. And like you said, things are popping in and out of existence, like
yeah.
different services, different clusters, and you wanted to be able to program your ZD services to reflect the current reality
Yeah, so every time you have a new location, instead of creating new service, you just add that location to the service.
to the existing service. Just a
Yes.
service update. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's cool. What do you want to show next?
Yeah, so I already prepared all this because I didn't want to go through gremlins during the live demo. So I hopefully
Good
so
luck with
I
that.
so I created two clusters just to show
Okay.
it's on and also I have that in my whoever is working with Azure, but basically this applies to any cloud. It's just obviously I use ARM templates, which are Azure kind of specific, but that the same thing can be created anywhere. And eventually, because we're updating the documentation on Ziti, on the DevOps as OpenZiti and our enterprise solutions as well, to kind of use um, what do you call it?
So you've got two destinations, two clusters.
Yeah, infrastructure as code. So Terraform. Sorry, it was kind of out of my so yeah. So basically, I created this infrastructure of code, templates where you can just run it and it will deploy basically
All right.
what it does. So it's basically, that's another thing, is you can just use the infrastructure as code to deploy these infrastructures along with the edge router. So basically what this does, you just run this command, you basically provide the location, you provide the template, which is already there, and you just provide like the client ID, because I'm accessing our APIs, so you have to use the client ID and client secret to access the APIs on the NetFoundry side. Because I was doing this on our enterprise version of not OpenZiti, but I put some OpenZiti commands in here as well to kind of show how the service and what details of the service need to be configured and
Hmm.
all that stuff. But
Okay, so what we're looking at is actually documentation for the Azure MEC product, which happens to represent this
yeah,
case. This is what you were
yeah,
working on when you
yeah.
stumbled upon this problem.
Yeah. So I didn't have the time to kind of convert this into OpenZiti, most of it. So, but eventually we're working on documentation OpenZiti. So all this gonna funnel through
I gotcha.
to OpenZiti. So right now it's kind of a mixed bag. So if somebody has any questions, can go there and have a quick look. And it's all straightforward, just the infrastructure of code and defining the infrastructure to deploy. And one of them is our ZDH router. So basically, I just ran that. And if I go back, if I go to my, just to show you what we have deployed, let me see, where's this? So let me just point that in here as well. So this is my Azure account, and obviously I was working with Microsoft on this, so it's kind of Microsoft related, but it can be done in any cloud. So basically,
Okay.
I deployed two clusters, right? So I called them East, so D Cube East, US East 2, which is their new public Mac, which is
A whole bunch of Azure resources in
and
here.
then West. Yeah, so two
Okay.
two clusters, two APIs, so just to show you how I can address them when I try to reach them, right? So that's the point of this. So then I have I have this. So now I have all the configuration. So if you run through the code, run through the procedure here, you can get to a point where you are gonna have the clusters set up, the services set up, and basically you just have to run your commands and see, that the reachability is there. And I have my ZDH tunnel here, which is, you can see it down here,
Okay.
has that service here, so we can kind of disable it to see that you cannot reach the services because it's all private clusters. So let me just run a command, kubectl config, I think, config.
No need to rush if you're going to get to this eventually, Darius, but I'm curious to see what the service config looks like if you have an example,
Yeah,
the one
yes,
that solves this problem of
yep.
multiple destinations.
So as you can see it, there's those two clusters. Now we kind of are the context we're using is West US, and then
Okay.
if you and I also deployed I kind of there's the application, also trying to show you the application side when it's zitified. One of our engineers internally kind of quickly did this zitification of gRPC,
Yep.
gRPC echo, kind of a hello world kind of a thing, and
Yeah.
very
An
quickly.
API server.
Yeah. And so I took his code and I kind of modified it a little bit, and I created this application to kind of show both services with his application running in a Kubernetes cluster. So I created like a little container out of it and all that. So thank you, Eugene, for helping me out there. I used that code. It was very nice. kubectl, and then get pods, for example, right? So I already deployed the application, gRPC echo server application on this. So if we switch the
So we're talking
context,
to West US just fine.
yes. So this is with US, and then I'm going to switch the context, right? So use the other context, right? Context, and this context will be, and this basically using the same commands, but you're going over Ziti right now, right? Without really knowing it. If you didn't configure yourself, you would not know it. And then you get pods, and you see it's a different pod right now. And then
Yeah, I
if I
see a
do,
different result. Okay. So you're talking to two different clusters by switching contexts, and
yeah,
your ZD Desktop Edge running on your Windows computer has a single service with both destinations.
yes. So just, I guess controller would be, so if we go to, yeah, I don't know, it's easier to maybe see it in our console to let it visualize this a little bit more than on the ZDH. So this is our enterprise console, right? But it's basically, the configuration is the same because we just passing the configuration to that. So the service that I created, and it's CLI or OpenZiti, is no different.
Can you zoom that?
So you could
Much
see
better.
it. So this is basically literally the same configuration you would pass the Ziti controller on an open Ziti,
Yes.
right? It's basically, there's
Right.
no difference, right? So the big part of this is, this would be regular service without this, right? So you would just have a service that you have addresses that being intercepted, are those that you, and those are the clusters, private cluster IP DNS names that would be intercepted on the ingress
Those are your
side.
two
And
cluster API
yeah,
servers.
yeah. So basically, you just have to get those, configure the servers with those, and then you enable dial options, right? And then you dial options by identity, and the identity, and then you have destination hostname. That means that any when the connection's being initiated, it's going to look at the DNS name of that connection that's being initiated. Obviously, there's going to be a DNS resolution first, and it's going to look at that, and it's going to identify that as basic destination that I'm trying to reach, and then the controller and all that will look at the entire network and then see, okay, there is a identity that's actually listening on this name, right? And that's the option that you have to add to the hosting side, right? Everything else is pretty much standard for the standard service, but the only thing you add is this listen option. So basically, that identity needs to be resolved to that identity ID, and because that's the destination that you're trying to reach. So the another thing, so since we're using tunnel ID name, so it's going to resolve the ID of that identity, or that endpoint that the
Okay.
service is hosted on. So the only caveat to that is that you would have to configure the identity name. So if
To
identity
be
name
an
to match
exact
that
match.
exact match, right? There's options that you can do, is which I didn't have it here, is actually you don't have to use the name of the identity, but you can actually use, let me just let's go to the controller, just to, since we're on this topic. So I'm in the controller, right? So um
That's really tiny if you can zoom it at all for the screen share. Thanks.
so let me see, is that so I did the identities. Now these are configs. So let me go to identities. This I oh
So your
so
identities there
yeah,
are the same, have the fully qualified domain name of the cluster API server so that it's an
yep,
exact match. So your variables will line up
yep.
in the config.
Right. So that configuration in that, when you go back here, that configuration is going to resolve the name of that identity to its name, and it's going to advertise this. So just to
Okay.
show you on the controller side, so if you
Can
go
we
to
can we pause on that config for just another second so I can
uh-huh,
recap real quick?
sure, go ahead.
Can you go back to the
Oh,
config?
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got two configs here, a host config and an intercept config, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the host config describes the binding side of the service, and the intercept describes the dial side or the client side.
Yes,
Okay, can you scroll down to the host config for a second?
that's the host config right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can you just scroll down a little bit more? Okay, that's fine. So the magical bit here is lines 3 and 4. So it's actually
Yeah.
configuring listen options. So this is like overriding the default identity name with the tunneler ID dot name, tunnel ID dot name.
No. That just resolves, looks at what the identity name is, and resolves the identity. I tell that when the service is created and looks at that, it's going to take that and say, I need to, on the service side, when I create a terminator for that service, I need to create an option for there's like the identity option on the terminator itself, and I need
Right.
to resolve that to be the identity of that
Okay.
endpoint that created the terminator.
Got it. All right. So tunneler ID dot name, and if you scroll up to the intercept config, that lines up with destination host name.
Yeah.
In both cases, the field name is identity. Okay, so that's the same identity. Cool.
Yeah, there could be destination IP, for example, another option here. So that would be just using
Okay.
IPs instead of.
If you were
So then,
using IPs as your identifier.
then you would have to here, for example, you would have to like do something along the lines of, uh, like say, you would have to put like 192, 168, something, right? 110. If you change this to like, if you say IP, for example, right? If you said IP,
Mm-hmm.
then you would have to, all of them to change to IPs. You can't have mixed, right? Because
Right.
it's either IP or
Pick one approach or the other.
yeah,
Okay, cool. But yeah, FQDNs makes a lot of sense for
yes,
flexibility.
yes.
Cool. Thanks, Darius.
Right. So then once that is resolved, when the terminator is created, just to show you on that side, right? So we go to terminators, right? So we go to terminators. Terminators.
And just to recap terminators really quick, this is a primitive in the ZD fabric. You don't normally create them manually. They emerge from service configs, and they basically describe where to send the traffic.
Yeah. Let me lower the font a little bit too,
Get it
because
to
it's
get it closer to the point of egress.
because it's easier to see. See identity. So each terminator, without that service being addressable terminators, you have nothing, right? You have nothing. So in this case, you see for that identity, which is that D cube, see D cube East 02 matches the identity that was resolved, right
Right.
there. So basically, that identity that's hosting this service, and they created the terminator was created based on that, and it's like, okay, I need to resolve the identity, the name of that identity that's
Exactly.
created me, and I need to advertise this. So now when anybody's trying to dial this, we'll know, okay, so this identity is hosting the service, and that's where my destination is. So this is how the controller knows how to route the traffic, how to create the path across the fabric to
Right.
reach that destination.
Right. And in
Um,
theory, in this use case, it needs to be the FQDN exactly, but this is very programmable, very flexible. You
yes,
could use arbitrary identifiers that suit any other use case.
yes, you can. As long as that matches on the ingress side and stuff like that, then yes, you can use names. But if it's a tunneler, basically, it's more of a, because you're intercepting traffic, so it has to be something that's packet related, like the destination IP or destination DNS names. But if you're creating your
Okay.
application, like I use this application here and I modified it myself a little bit to match. You can see it. I use the different names. I just use the name of the identity that I
Right.
wanted to, and just the name, right? Because it's my service. I control both the source application and the destination application. So the client side of the application and the server side of the application. So this is the Ziti embedded side of it that it's extendable. You can do a lot of things with it yourself if you creating the application yourself. Obviously, when you're just using the tunneling option, then you kind of limited to what you can do with it, because you are limited to the networking side of it, right? Because the networking, you
Yeah,
cannot
that makes
just, yeah,
perfect sense.
yeah,
That's a great clarification. So, in my own words, you said that if the identifier that you use needs to be something network related, something packet related if you're using tunnelers, because that's the only way that we can differentiate the destination. Because when you're using a tunneler, the actual client application is naive to ZD. It doesn't implement ZD. It's just using IP
right,
and then domain names.
yep,
But if
yep,
you're implementing ZD in an embedded application, in an embedded use case, then you could have arbitrary identifiers.
that's exactly right, yeah.
Cool.
And then there's other things when you're Zidifying, when you're running your application, you have a lot of more extensibility that you can use in Zidi. You're not limited to the networking, obviously, but this is, we try to show both ways. So when you're starting out and you don't know where to start, it's like start with what you know, and then once you get grasp of that, and you working yourself way into Ziti deeper and deeper, you can start doing some other things which are cool as well.
Cool. So did that so did getting that service config worked out pretty much get you to your
Yeah.
solution, or does that leave some more rough edges for
No,
you?
I mean, for that use case to reach those destinations that I wanted, is that what I wanted. So basically, I got what I wanted.
Awesome.
Um, so it's there. Um,
Yeah, that's powerful.
yeah, so let me just show you, so it's not smokes and mirrors, right? So if I disable the tunneler, right? So if I disable the tunneler, right? So let's see. So just to show you that I'm not sending this in some kind of magic tunnel or something. So let me see the get pods.
Nothing works.
Yeah, and you can see
Unable
it
to
that,
connect to server.
and you can see that it does a lookup on this and can't find it
Right.
because this doesn't exist on the internet, right? So
It might exist somewhere in Azure internal DNS, right? But it
yeah,
doesn't exist on the internet.
yeah. So now let me go back to this.
So your tunneler is providing your computer with ZDDNS.
Yes, so that's being intercepted when it tries to look this up. Our tunneler intercepts the DNS and says this this DNS name can be reached across our network, and it gives
Right.
him our local private IP, and here we go.
Pretty much instantaneous. That's great.
Yeah, so that's one part, and then the other part is the Ziti finding application. So I wanted to also show this. Hopefully, this is going to work because my application is, I'm not a developer. I'm trying to be one, but it's not as easy as you think. But so so basically, I have two applications running, two servers, identical servers, gRPC echo servers that kind of reply to what the client is sending. And so let me just, okay,
Okay.
so let me just see context here. So we are on East, for example, right? So let me just log into one of them to see the logs.
It feels like
Log.
we're shifting topics a little bit. Can you give me like a high level
Yeah.
summary of what we're going for next?
So up to this point, so we were working on a control plane
Of
of the
Kubernetes.
Kubernetes, right? So you kind of get,
Okay.
how do you manage the clusters? You manage specific clusters you want, then you select the destinations, and that was the use case that you want, and you have the control plane over Ziti, and then control planes could be talking to one another. You can have a user, and you can have maybe orchestration system that somebody might have, and actually use
Right.
Ziti network to reach these clusters to deploy them and configures them and manages them, right? That was the one use case. The second use case, actually, the data plane, so to speak, on the clusters on the Kubernetes, where you deploy your application. So basically, what I did is just I ran kubectl. I had a manifest. So in my if you go to my basically my repo, I have this manifest for deploying Echo, right? My application. I created this little container with this, and I kind of download this container, and I deploy this Echo server that kind of
Hmm.
listens, and I provide, as you can see, that I was able to like assign two services to it. So most likely your application might only have one service and all that, but I wanted to show two, so I kind of assigned two services to it. And the only difference between those two services is this address by identity, which is when you select those, when you select in the configuration option, you select either you listen or not listen on the identity. This address by identity gets set. So in my application, I'm setting this directly, so there's no really configuration to pass. You just have to pass this service, and the service has this option, which is just a service name. And basically, do you want this to be addressable service or not addressable service, right? So this is the two differences between the service that kind of load balances you to the best location that can reach, or the one that you can actually address that specific application that you want to reach, right?
Okay, so
Uh,
you've got an Echo server pod in
mhm.
your Kubernetes manifest here, and it just has one container in the
Yeah,
list.
just one
So
container.
just
Yeah, it's
one
very
container.
simple. Yeah, one container.
Okay,
Yep.
and you're passing in some arguments here.
Yep.
You've got the ZD identity JSON, and you've got two different hosted services arguments.
Hmm.
One is true, one is false, and they're for two different services, two different
Hmm.
ZD service names.
Yep. Yeah, as you can see, one is addressable, one is not. So just to show you the difference, and we can, when I run the command, hopefully we will see how one is routed to the closest location and the other one is routed based on what I input into that application. What kind of,
So what are we going to use for our client side? Are you going to be
so
going through your tunneler again?
no, I have a client application running on my, or I have a client application, and I'm just going to run the client application. I have a Go
Okay.
binary that I created. So this is just to show you that. So I deployed this through a no, I went in here and I just said, okay, well, you know, apply and stuff like that. Apply -f, and I applied the manifest. So basically, I went and deployed this container, this pod through Ziti, basically, right through
Yep.
my control plane.
Over your ZD connection.
Yep. So now I deployed it right here, um, and I'm gonna be. So let me go and get the pods, right? So for example, let me just listen on it because I was gonna listen, right? So I'm gonna go logs -f. I'm gonna look at pod here, right? And you
All
can see
right.
it. I already ran some tests before, but you could see it would print something, right? If I hit it with my client, it's gonna say I received this. I'm gonna pass a string, and the string is gonna be outputted here, and then it's gonna say what kind of service it is, and then
Yep.
it's gonna say the server identity this is running on, and you can see it. It's in the east, and it's Atlanta, so we know that's the right. So this is the identity name, basically, of that thing. So here I already have the binary, which is gRPC echo. It's my client side, and then I have okay. So which service I'm passing, which service I'm going to be using. So I'm using the addressable service, for example. Then I have to pass the config, which is my identity, obviously, so I can able to access the fabric, and I have the right, obviously, uh, the right rights to the service and stuff like that. And then I'm passing basically echo string. So I'm going to send the string, and the string is going to echo back to me, right? And then I say, okay, which identity do I want to use? I want to say, okay, I'm going to use West, right? And this is the East. I should not see anything here. Then we can go back to the West, and you can see if that was
So
outputted
how
there.
is your client using this identity argument, gRPC server West US?
Yeah, so it's basically I just I use that identity to in my client application to reach basically to advertise to the service that I wanna go to that identity that's hosting the service on
Oh,
that
that's their
specific
destination.
on that specific destination. Yes, exactly right. Yes.
Okay.
So let me send that, and you can see it,
So we're
and you
we're
can see it.
listening for logs on East US, but you sent
Yes.
it to West US.
Right, and you can see a gRPC address, gRPC server West replied, and check ES. That was the string I sent, and then that string came back to me. Right, this is the string I sent. That string
Yep.
came back. So if
It
I,
succeeded, but it went to the other cluster, not the one that
yeah,
we're listening for.
yeah. So if I change the check, say I check West US, I send it. That's what I got back. Check US. That's my string,
Get
and it's
back an
still
echo, whatever
it's
you
still
sent.
the same. Yeah, it's still the same.
Yep.
So if I close this and I change the context of this, right, to go to use context, context. Oh, shit, I forgot the name of the oh, there we go. All right, so I switch there. So now I get the pods. So let me see. So let me just go to the logs here, right? Mhm. and you can see it. It was
There it is.
1540, 1541. So check US2 was one received on this service, and the identity that was received on is server West US.
Sure.
And I check this, and there you go, right? So now if I do this, I say Atlanta, Atlanta, right? If I do Atlanta, right? I don't see anything show up here. It went to the east, right? Because that's what Atlanta is, and says the Atlanta replied. And this is my thing, right? So now if I obviously if I go back there, I'll see that. But I want so before I go there, I want to show is if I use the other service, which is the load balancing service, right? So if I go to here and I say just regular service, right? Not addressable. So then if I run this again and I say S identity, it should give me an error message saying
Right, because
there's no
it's load
terminators,
balanced,
right?
not
Yeah,
addressable.
right. So there's no terminators. You can't address this by a name.
Yep.
So I'm gonna say so no identity. I don't really care about identity, and I'm gonna say check US 222, for example, right? And I'm gonna say okay, go,
It's going to go somewhere. So if
and
we're
it's
listening to east, it must have gone to.
no, we're listening to West, right? We're
We're
listening still
listening to west.
West,
That's right. We switched.
and remember this is the regular service. So this regular service takes you to the closest location by default, and depending if the closest location is available or not. But in this case, it is, and there's no errors and stuff like that. So you can see it. It went to Atlanta because Atlanta. I'm in New Jersey, in the East Coast, right? This is
Yep.
in Atlanta, and
So if you
the
send
West
several,
is.
then we should see at least one show up on the top pane because it's load balanced.
Uh, yeah, it depends. I mean, it depends how because I'm not sending that much traffic, so I'm not sure how many times I would have to send. But I just don't want to show this that it's not going to the west, it's going to the east, and that's what the service is, right? So let me just to show show that just so we don't jump. So we show basically that, and then I think that was the logs. Yeah, so you can see it. It went there, right?
This time it's from the non-addressable service.
Yes, you can see it. Non-addressable service, and it came from this is the string I sent, and this is the Atlanta identity that
Right.
received it, right? So
Cool. Looks like all the your requests are going where you think where they
right,
should.
it's basically that's what I wanted, right? So that just wanted to show that the two different things on either on the control plane or the data plane as well, right? So
Right.
if you and obviously as you said before, that you have so much more flexibility if you're doing applications yourself. You're not limited to the network with the network because you can't really change the network. You have to work with the network, so to speak. So
Right.
that's powerful, I think. But yeah, I think that's basically it.
Okay. Well then, yeah. My key takeaway here is that you can actually use addressable terminators with a tunneler,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is as long as you name your identities to exactly match the FQDN or IP address, and then use the right variables in your service configs, it works beautifully.
Yeah, just to point of reference, the DNS names is like a lot of our enterprise customers. Like I think we have one customer that actually wanted to use something like that because so you can run this on the router itself, or you can run this on a tunneler on the other side. Because in this case, is a tunneler to router, right, scenario. But you can run this tunneler to tunneler, so you can run this on a server, just a single server, and you can have multiple of these servers. And most enterprise customers name these servers as DNS names. So
Right.
inventory wise, now they have a solution that they can actually address, so they can do maintenance on these servers just by doing that, which is I think it's really cool and powerful
Using
that
a
you
piece
can
of
actually.
information they already
Yes.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is basically like a point to multi-point service, right?
Right.
which is
Very
which is
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see the power of that. Well, thanks so much for showing that to us, Dariush. And if anybody wants to start a conversation about this in the forum, we do have a discourse, and You can always ask a question there. And you can also find us on Twitter and YouTube as OpenZiti. So thanks a lot, Darius. That's a wrap.
Yep. Thank you for having me. See you
You're
guys.
welcome. Thank you.